Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and today I have a Introduction to VGC 2015 video. In this video, I'm basically going to cover what VGC 2015 is, the top Pokemon in the format, what makes it different from previous years, and my personal opinions on the format and what I think is going to be good. Now, I think this video is going to be pretty helpful for both those that are completely new to the VGC format, as well as those that have been playing for maybe 1 or 2 years but aren't very familiar with the new rule set and want a quick introduction to it. So, I hope this video helps you, and I'm pretty excited to do it. So some general information for those that are new to VGC, the rule set is ORIS National Pokédex, so basically almost every Pokemon is allowed, but a couple of legendaries are banned, and you can see that on the official rule document. The Pentagon rule is also in effect, meaning if you're playing in-game, your Pokemon have to be caught or bred in X, Y, and ORIS. They can't be transferred over from previous games like Ruby, Diamond, etc. Of course, VGC 15 is double battles, like always, 4 vs 4, you choose 4 Pokemon but you bring 6 on your team. In terms of Pokemon, if you played VGC 13 and VGC 14, it's basically a combination of the top Pokemon from those two respective years. It's very similar to 2013 in terms of the rule set, which is National Dex, but it's actually completely different in terms of playstyle. No more gems allowed, attacks being nerfed, new move tutors, mega evolutions, which is a really big factor, fairy type being introduced, resistances being removed, and Pentagon removing a lot of popular things like Defiant from the genies, completely changes the format. In general, I'd say the format is less about hyper offense. You know, there are no more attacks like Latios' Dragon Gem Draco Meteor or Tornadus' Flying Gem Acrobatics, and those are attacks were basically used to nuke your opponent on the first turn and get a one-hit KO. Now that it's a lot harder to get one-hit KOs like that on the first turn, the format is more defensively oriented, which in my opinion is good. I don't like hyper offense for any year of VGC, and in the end, when you look at Worlds each year at VGC, the top teams tend to be those that are more bulky. So it's nice to see that. It's a refreshing change of pace. So legendaries coming back is a really big factor for those that have played VGC 14. There were not very many legendaries allowed, and really Zapdos was the only popular one. But this year, a ton of legendaries are back. Many of the top legendaries that dominated VGC 13 are currently on top of the ladder right now, as you should expect. You should also expect a lot of the top teams to have at least one legendary, as the 2013 World Championships demonstrated. Basically everyone had at least one legendary, so you've got to prepare accordingly for this. As a result, you need to prepare for the following. These are going to be huge, and they're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Cresselia, Thundurus, Landorus, Heatran, Zapdos, and Suicune. The first 4 are essential, but the last 2 are also annoying to deal with and super powerful. Smaller but important ones include Entei and Raikou, Terrakion, Virizion, Cobalion, Latios, and Latias, but the first 6 I listed up there are ones you need to have a way to counter. Now, as opposed to VGC 13, Tornadus and Latios are a lot weaker with the removal of gems. They're still viable, but they're not nearly as good as they were in that year. And a lot of you guys have asked how you get your good IV legendary. You basically have to soft reset for them, and there's a really good guide on Nugget Bridge for this, which I'll link in the description below, but it gives you all the tricks and tips you basically need to know to get your own good IV legendary Pokemon. Now, I know a lot of people are inclined to soft reset until they get a flawless legendary, and of course that makes sense, but if you don't have the time for that, you should just soft reset for a legendary that has, 31 and 3 stats, which is already given, so that saves you a lot of time, and maybe 25 or higher in the other 2 stats. Speed is one you'll probably want to get a 31 in if you're running a fast legendary, but for the others, you can afford to lose a couple of IVs here and there. Of course, ideally, if you were going into a tournament like Nationals or Worlds, you want a perfect IV Pokemon, but in terms of practicing in-game, it really doesn't hurt that much to get one that's slightly less IV'd, but will save you a lot of time. But definitely check that guide on Nugget Bridge, it should help you guys a lot. So Mega Evolutions is a pretty big factor in VGC as well after they were introduced last year. If you played 2014 at all, you knew that Kangaskhan, Mawile, and Charizard Y dominated the format, and unsurprisingly, they are on top of the ladder this year. Kangaskhan is actually the #1 most used Pokemon on Battle Spot doubles right now, so you gotta make sure you prepare for it as you did in 2014. Other 2014 Megas that you may see include Gengar, which is actually surprisingly common now, Gardevoir, which is really powerful now that it gets Hyper Voice, Tyranitar, Manectric, Lucario, Blastoise, Gyarados, which of course won the World Championships on St. Joe Park's team, and gets access to Crunch, now with the ORIS move tutors, Aerodactyl, Charizard X. These are all Megas that were used in 2014 to varied success, but you should expect to see them around this year as well. As for ORIS Megas, this is a pretty interesting point of discussion. I might do a video in the future to talk about them individually. As far as I've seen so far, Salamence, Metagross, Camerupt, Swampert, Lopunny, and Gallade are the most popular ones, and the other ones don't look like they're as viable, even though they can certainly be used. But ones like Sableye, Audino, Beedrill, those certainly don't look like they can be very good, mainly because if you think about the top Megas in VGC, they have a good mix of offense and defense, and you know, the ones that I just listed before are on one end of the spectrum but not the other. I'm not even sure if any Oris Mega will be on Kangaskhan, Mawile, or Charizard Y level, though Salamence and Metagross look like they have the potential to be, but we're gonna have to wait for the meta to kind of formulate a bit more. So, top Pokemon currently, these are the top 12 Pokemon I have listed on BattleSpot Doubles as per the official Pokemon website. They are Kangaskhan, Landorus, Talonflame, Sylveon, Aegislash, Salamence, Bisharp, Rotomwash, Amoonguss, Garchomp, Hydreigon, Gengar. If you're building a VGC 15 team, you've got to make sure you have at least one way to beat all of these Pokemon, because I guarantee you, for most of the battles you play online, the teams you face will have at least one or two of these Pokemon, sometimes maybe 3, 4, 5, or even 6. So you've got to watch out for these. They're really strong and bulky, and just, you know, I don't expect that top 12 to change very much in the upcoming weeks, months even. Of course, the metagame will shift, but it makes sense that those Pokemon are currently on top. Previously mentioned Megas and Legendaries as well as top Pokemon, and I have a list of a couple Pokemon I've singled out as I think I've seen basically a lot currently on BattleSpot. I'm not going to read them all out loud to you, but you can pause the video to make sure you see exactly how many and which ones you need to beat. I think they all have a lot of potential. I've already faced at least one of them in a team basically in my time on BattleSpot Double, so make sure you prepare for those. So a lot of people ask me, how do I counter insert Pokemon name here? Well, I've got a really helpful tool for you that many of you may not know. If you go to 3ds.pokemon-gl.com and click on rating battles, you can basically check the top Pokemon in VGC 15 on BattleSpot Doubles, and you can also see what Pokemon those Pokemon lose to. So if you just follow those instructions up there and click the When Defeated tab, you can see the top 10 Pokemon that have beaten the Pokemon you want to counter, which should help you a lot in terms of figuring out what Pokemon you might want to put on your team to counter other top ones. I'm also going to be making guides for each individual Pokemon and covering good counters to all of them very soon, so subscribe to this channel if you're not already so you can get updated on those. I'll be starting those basically right after this video is done. As for new faces from VGC 14, for those that have played VGC 2014 but are new to this year and, you know, aren't sure really what you might see that you haven't seen in previous years. Of course, Legendaries and the new Mega Evolutions are really big, but I've also listed a couple of more. Milotic and Arcanine, both which are actually pretty new to VGC as a whole. They weren't very good in previous years, but now they're very viable. Milotic, of course, gets access to competitive, which, you know, deters people from spamming Intimidate with their Pokemon. Arcanine, which is your bulky fire type, which also is pretty offensive to counter the ever-present steel types. Whimsicott, which was a prankster user really popular in 2011 to beat up on Terrakion. That combo is still viable, so you should expect to see it if you see the 2 in team preview. It's also now part fairy type and is a really annoying prankster user with access to Tailwind. Togekiss is another fairy type that gets access to Tailwind but bulkier than Whimsicott, also very commonly used as a follow me user. Breloom is just a fast Spore user. You know, there's Amoonguss, which also gets access to Spore, but it's really slow and doesn't do much offensively. Breloom, on the other hand, is really frail, but is very, very offensive and can get Spores off left and right, so gotta prepare for that. Hitmontop is a Fake Out user, very similar to Scrafty, but gets access to moves like Wide Guard, Quick Guard, Fake Out, Close Combat, and even Stone Edge, and it was very popular in 2012 and 2013. Volcarona is pretty unique in its bug fire typing, and it also gets access to Quiver Dance, also one of the top Pokemon in 2013. Excadrill pairs really nicely with Tyranitar, but you also see Mobe Breaker used often to counter Levitate users like Rotom, and Dusclops is a super bulky Trick Room user I've seen with access to Will-O-Wisp and Pain Split. Now, these are just some of the newer faces to VGC 15 from 2014. There's still a lot more, but in general, these are the ones that I've isolated as some of the top ones you should expect to see and prepare for. So if you don't know what these Pokemon do and you play 2014, definitely read up on them so you know exactly what's coming for you when you battle them. Move tutors is a pretty big factor in Oris as well. There weren't move tutors allowed last year, so the inclusion of Oris move tutors is really big. And I've just listed a couple of the most important ones in VGC and some common users of them. You've got Icy Wind, Helping Hand, Hyper Voice, Heat Wave, Tailwind, Ice Punch, Knockoff, and Low Kick. And like I said, I've listed a couple of Pokemon that you often see carry those. So if you see any of these Pokemon, you should expect at least one of these moves. The move tutors are really good, especially knockoff, which of course got a buff in terms of power, so that's why Bisharp is so popular nowadays. But Landorus T also gets it, and that's pretty common. The other moves shouldn't be that much of a surprise. Hyper Voice is a really big one on Gardevoir, Salamence, and Sylveon, which we see very often. Probably one of the biggest move tutors in Aurus. Let's change the format drastically. As for common strategies, now that VGC 15 basically allows almost everything, there are a ton of common strategies in Pokemon, and I've just listed a couple you should definitely prepare for. Weather teams, Trick Room teams, Prankster spam, that's really annoying, so make sure you have a way to stop that, like with Taunt or just ways to KO those Pokemon. Speed control is really big now. In 14, it wasn't really that common, mainly because there weren't many good speed control users, but now we have Icy Wind, Thunder Wave, KO Wind, Trick Room all back. Dark Void shenanigans, gotta prepare for Smeargle, Perish Trap with Mega Gengar, Redirection with Follow Me, and or Rage Powder, of course, Amoonguss, Togekiss, Pachirisu, which won Worlds this year, and Lucario, just to name a few. Intimidate's really common as well, so you'll probably want to make sure your team isn't all physical type attackers, or you have a way to benefit from Intimidate, for example, Bisharp or Milotic. Fake Out users are common like every year with VGC. Spore finds a new friend with Breloom, and Minimize spam, probably one of the most annoying strategies. Doesn't really work out in actual tournaments, but a lot of people like to use this on the online ladder, so prepare for it, because otherwise you're going to be in for a pretty tough time. As for EVing your Pokemon, I'll be making more specific guides on EVing Pokemon in the future, but in general, people like to EV to survive specific attacks. For example, previous years we EV to survive Dragon Gem Draco Meteor, Choice Specs Hydreigon Draco Meteor, etc. So I've just listed 4 attacks that I think are pretty important to cover. Modest Charizard Y Sun Boosted Overheat, Modest Choice Specs Hydreigon Draco Meteor, Admit Mega Kangaskhan Double Edge, and Admit Mega Salamence Double Edge. If you can survive those attacks, chances are you're a very bulky Pokemon, and you can survive most of the attacks in the format. So those are 4 you probably want to pay special attention to, at least as of right now. So my general impressions of 15, I think, is basically it's an amazing format. Because of the power nerf, which I mentioned earlier, teams aren't nearly as offensive, which I like it because I like more defensively oriented metagames. More Pokemon allowed in VGC 15 than 14, which means it's not going to be as stale. VGC 14 felt pretty stale towards the end, though at the World Championships a lot of people discovered new Pokemon. So even though it seems like VGC tends to be stale at one point or another, there are always really unique Pokemon that people manage to use and are actually very viable as well, so don't be afraid to expand your options. More Mega Evolutions than last year, of course, means more options. There are also more strategies that are viable now, as I mentioned previously, and speed control is a really big one. Move tutors, of course, changes things up a considerable amount as well, especially with Hyper Voice being in the format. So, in general, I really like VGC 15, and I think it's going to be a really promising rule set. I think it may even end up being the best rule set in VGC we've ever played with, so it should be really exciting to play with it. And to conclude, I've just got some helpful resources for those that want to, play VGC 15 or are trying to get into it. Nugget Bridge is definitely the #1 site. It's a premier VGC website, fan-held, that holds weekly live tournaments. I'm actually a moderator there, so if you have any questions, you can always ask me and find me there. They have some really helpful resources. They've got a speed tier list, which will be really important in terms of building your team. I'm actually going to make a team building guide very soon, so keep your eyes open for that, but that's a really valuable resource. The soft resetting for legendaries guide, as I mentioned earlier. Nugget Bridge Circuit is really good as well. It's basically live weekly tournaments that Nugget Bridge holds that are online through Wi-Fi. You can basically practice VGC with some of the top players in the world through that every week. And they also have a YouTube channel which is constantly updated with VGC matches and content. Eggy Emporium, built by Wolfie Glick and Marcus Statter, not used or not updated very often, but still has really quality content. Team Magma Team Builder is a pretty rare one that people don't know about, but it basically allows you to list all 6 of your Pokemon, and you can quickly see what types your team is weak to, which I think is really valuable in terms of team synergy and figuring out what your team should really need or change. The Pokemon Global Link site, as I mentioned earlier, can show you the top Pokemon and ways to beat them. Pokemon Showdown, as always, good way to practice the format without actually needing a team in-game. Ranked Battle Spot, a really good way to practice in-game, so those are the 2 means of practice I really like, in addition to the Nugget Bridge Circuit. And finally, Pokemon.com to find the closest live event to you. So that's basically it for this introduction to VGC 2015 video. I hope it helped you basically in terms of getting introduced to the format, learning a bit more here and there, etc. I'll be doing more in-depth guides in the upcoming days, including team building videos and individual Pokemon analyses. So if you like this video, please leave a like to show your support. If you want to see more content like this, definitely let me know. And I hope this one helped, guys. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.